for those sellers who are selling their output at a price of P, of producer surplus, which is just the difference between the price that they sell their barrel of oil for and the minimum price that they're willing to accept, the actual cost of production. So for example, this ith seller is receiving a price of P for her barrel of oil. The economic cost to her is only down here, measured by the height of the supply curve. So she receives some sort of a gains from trade equivalent to that vertical distance between the price she receives and the cost she incurs. These sellers as well will also realize some sort of a producer surplus, but it'll be smaller. Not because the price that they receive is any lower, but the costs that they incur are higher. So they just have less or fewer gains that they can extract from the marketplace for any given transaction. Now, if we imagine that along the supply curve there are many sellers, okay, all extracting some sort of surplus from the marketplace, we can kind of add up the surplus for each of these sellers, and what we're going to see is that total producer surplus, which is just, as you can see here, the summation of each seller's surplus, or measured as the area of this blue triangle. And the way that I like to quickly identify what that producer surplus is visually is it's always going to be the area below the price in the marketplace, in this case 20, the area above the supply curve, i.e. the area above every seller's economic cost, and up to the quantity that actually gets supplied, in this case 50. So using that heuristic, we've identified this blue triangle as measuring total producer surplus. And we can calculate the area of this triangle quite simply using the base times height divided by 2 formula for a right triangle. The base of this triangle being 50, the height being 10, so 10 times 50 is 500, divided by 2 is 250. So that's how we get this example, or this answer right here. And that's the measure of the total gains from trade for sellers at a price of 20. As we indicated earlier, when prices rise, we see that quantity supply rises. That's a movement up along the supply curve. But we also know that there are several other variables that actually influence quantity supplied. Now, their influence is not depicted explicitly on the supply curve. We only have 2 variables that we're measuring. Price is on the y-axis, and Q is on the x-axis. But those other variables still play a role. And those changes will be depicted not by a movement along the curve, but by a shift of the curve. A rightward downward shift, which is oftentimes referred to as an increase in supply, using the horizontal perspective. At a given price, along the original supply curve, quantity supply was Q, but now, for whatever reason, that rightward shift allows quantity supplied at a price of P to be much, much larger, Q prime. So there's been an increase in quantity supplied, holding prices constant. Conversely, we can view a downward shift in the supply curve, a reduction in the minimum price that sellers are willing to accept. So we see that along the original supply curve, in order to produce that Qth unit, that Qth barrel of oil, for example, sellers were initially willing to accept no less than P. Now the minimum price that they're willing to accept is much lower, P prime. And as you might expect, an upward or leftward shift in the supply curve, which we oftentimes refer to as a decrease in supply, has the opposite interpretation. So, taking that horizontal perspective, where at a price of P, quantity supplied was initially Q, it has since fallen down to Q prime. Or, in order to produce that Qth unit of output, where sellers initially required no less than a price of P, now they're requiring a price of no less than P prime, a much higher price. Okay, so that's how I would interpret an increase and a decrease in supply.